Welcome everybody to the Futbol Idealists Podcast. So of course it's been a while. If you notice, it's our first episode since April, I think. But throughout all this time, I've definitely personally really wanted to really launch this because I'm very interested in doing this, and I'm sure we're going to have some great guests down the line as we have today. So yeah, so I'm your host. I'm Nick at NSFTBL on Twitter. I'm a co-founder of Futbol Idealists, and I'm probably going to be hosting most of these. And today for our return, we have two very special guests, two very special writers that we have in the website. So yeah, you can introduce yourselves. Aiden, go ahead.
Hey everybody, Aiden. I'm writing for Futbol Idealists and on Twitter as at iTestFB. And yeah, happy to be here. Excited to kind of get the podcast and help get the podcast relaunched. It's like something that I'm really interested in doing more of down the line. So I'm excited.
And Raf?
Hi guys, I'm Rafa Adeluba. On Twitter, Rafa Adeluba with 0 at the end. I'm good. I'm happy to be on today's episode, and I'm excited to be here, and I'm sure it'll be a good one.
Great. So yeah, obviously there has not been a lot of football going on past few weeks because of international breaks and winter breaks and all that. So, but the main talking point around Twitter and football in general has been the transfer window. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we saw quite a bit of business in general compared to other windows. Like, I think this is relatively one of the loudest January windows we've had in the past few years. A lot more money going around than expected, and a lot of interesting business, mainly in the Premier League. But also we can talk about in the end about some other European teams that had a lot of business. So yeah, I mean, first of all, I think most people are interested to hear about the top 6 battle, the top 4 battle, basically in the Premier League. Obviously, a lot of the teams going in they had plenty of needs, but not everyone made all of the signings that they needed. And obviously, in terms of Arsenal as well, and Chelsea and Spurs, there's been quite a bit of a reaction around that. So yeah, I think we can just break it down little by little. So I think the most interesting team was Spurs, actually, because there were a lot of reports of Conte having a lot of backing in the January. There were big links, Adama Traore in the beginning, Luis Diaz, people like that. But instead, they ended up with a more not cheap by any means, but a more conservative window. I think they went for cheaper options to shore up some areas that they needed help in. So obviously the two signings Spurs made from Juventus, a former club of Conte, and obviously that's where their director of football, Fabio Paratici, comes from as well. So yeah, so obviously they signed Rodrigo Betancourt, an Uruguayan midfielder, for 19 million euros reportedly, and then Dejan Kulusevski, who is initially going to be a loan with around 10 million pounds fee, and then I think if all of the conditions are met, which are probably going to be met, it's going to be around 40 million euros down the line. So yeah, I mean, do any of you have any thoughts around these signings? Whether you rate them and whether they strengthen Spurs enough?
Well, first of all, I think it's hilarious to think of Tottenham's transfer window from like the start when they were linked to Adama Traore and Luis Diaz, and there were links to Kesse on getting him in the January transfer window, and beating competition in the summer for him, and then to end up with Kulusevski and Bentancur, who are decent players. They're players that I know Conte and Paratici will know a little bit about, but I think we all know Conte, when he's not getting his ideal transfers, it could be a bit of a head loss throughout the end of the season. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they settle in. We know Serie A is very renowned for kind of its slow kind of football. And then coming into a league, coming into a system that is very quick and it needs for you to adapt quickly. So it'll be very interesting to see, especially Bentancur, who's coming into a midfield of Skip, Højbjerg and wings, very conservative midfield. And he's a player who's going to be expected to move the ball a lot quicker. And with Kulusevski, it'll be interesting to see how he fits into maybe a three of him, Son and Kane, or maybe him behind Kane and Son, maybe in a more 10 role. So yeah, it's been an interesting window for Tottenham especially.
Oh, and Nathan, before you go any further, I forgot to mention that they did let go two of their formerly big signings in Ndombele and Lo Celso. And obviously Ndombele is the bigger talking point here because he came up with ridiculous expectations. He was a player that pretty much when he was at Lyon, I can't think of a single football fan in the Premier League that didn't want him in his team. He was incredibly hyped up, and obviously it's not gone great for them. But aside from that, Aidan, give us your thoughts on Spurs windows.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting today. Just before we started recording, we were talking about a couple signings who potentially were going to be potentially signed for reasons other than maybe just to play their primary position, like a guy who maybe plays central midfield who was signed as a right back. We talked about Tomiyasu a little bit, and actually interestingly, there was something that Conte said earlier, like when he was talking about the signings, that kind of potentially alluded to Kulusevski maybe being versatile and being able to be moved around in different positions and potentially even playing, as like a wing back or something like that at some point. And it's a really interesting thing that, although I think on paper, well, not necessarily on paper, but the way that we analyze these players, you mentioned Rafa's like coming from Serie A to the Premier League, like we initially think, okay, these guys might not fit. But I think that with an Italian coach in Conte who's won titles in Serie A and in the PL, it's probably the best situation for them to be coming into. So they have the sort of, I guess, the easiest cushion, the easiest possible transition from, a league like Serie A to the Premier League, which is much faster, much more aggressive. So I think the signings are interesting. Like I kind of agree. I think they're interesting. I don't necessarily know if they're like either of them are blockbuster deals. But I'm more interested for them in just like who they got rid of, basically. I mean, getting rid of Dele Alli, Lo Celso, and Ndombele, three players who Conte just was never going to use any of them. I mean, he tried them all out because he had to. When he first came, you have no choice. You have to make something work because the team was on like a downward spiral. But at this point, we're in a situation where he didn't want to use any of them, and he literally did exactly what he wants. And that's an important thing for Conte, I think. He was able to get rid of the players he didn't want in the squad, and he replaced them with two guys who, in theory, can replace some of the qualities that, Kulusevski can replace maybe some of the qualities Dele Alli, leaves the team with, and, Ndombele with Bentancur and as well as Lo Celso. And so, I think that the biggest thing for Spurs is how happy is Conte, because that's going to really determine how far that they can go as a project, whether it is, just 1 year where he takes them to top four, or they miss out on top four and he leaves, or he stays for a while and they really challenge for some real titles, will be decided by these windows where does he get the thing that he's looking for, that he's asking the board for.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, and both of you said, in terms of Conte, he can be a very demanding manager when it comes to the transfer market. I mean, primarily, I think it's been reported that this is the reason why he left Chelsea and why he left on bad terms. He was not backed with the signings that he wanted. And it was not just about getting backed, financial wise, because they did get some huge signings. They spent like more than 100 million in Conte's final summer at Chelsea. It was more about not getting the right players. For example, they chose Morata instead of Lukaku, etc. So, I think both of those signings, they're interesting. I think obviously Kulusevski has definitely the highest upside out of the two. I think Bentancur will be a depth option and more of a placeholder until Conte gets his ideal midfielder, if he stays there enough. I think the main question to ask here is like, did they strengthen the positions that they needed? And I'm not sure I can say yes to that, because obviously the big position that Conte wanted to fill in coming into January was right wing back. and that's why they had targeted Adama Traore, who rejected them in the end to join Barcelona. And now Conte obviously said a few hours earlier that Kulusevski has the potential to play at right wing back, and I think he did a little bit for Juventus under Pirlo in a slightly different system, but sort of similar as well to Conte. But it's going to be interesting where he plays. I think he's a player that has been misused in the past, and I think any club that was looking to buy him to play him as a right winger, which is thought to be his main position, was not gonna get a good return on their investment, because I think he's a player that thrives more centrally, and I think he's a little too stiff and not agile enough in general to be able to be a good one-to-one dribbler down the sides, which is one of the most important qualities of the Premier League winger. So I think Conte obviously doesn't really use wingers, and I think he's going to find a lot of positions potentially to use Kulusevski in. Wing back is an option, even though I'm not a big fan for the reasons that I explained. He could even be used as a part of midfield three. He could be used as a number 10 in a 3-4-1-2. He could be used as a second striker, which I think is his best position. But the problem is that Kane and Son exist, so he's not going to start a lot in that role. And I mean, yeah, it's interesting. And regarding Betancourt, I'm not a big fan of the player. I mean, he won't be disastrous for them, but he's not. I think the main player they needed, I think the main profile actually they needed was a number 6 that could dictate tempo, have great passing range, and be one of the main cogs in Conte's build-up, as he had at Inter with Brozovic, and obviously at Chelsea with Matic. And I don't think Bentancur is that. Bentancur is primarily more of a box-to-box option, but doesn't really have. He has some tools all over the place, but he doesn't have any outstanding qualities, in my opinion. Then I think that's enough for Spurs. I think we all pretty much agreed that they made interesting signings, but we're not sure if it's going to be like enough to elevate them to be a lock for top 4. I think the next interesting club to talk about was Arsenal, because obviously they didn't make any signings, but they let a ton of people go, and they let Chambers to Aston Villa, Aubameyang to Barcelona, obviously Ainsley Maitland-Niles to Roma on loan, Pablo Mari to Udinese, I think, on loan, and in the end they didn't make any signings that were going to contribute right away. Obviously they were linked with Vlahovic all window, who ended up going to Juventus. So even though Arsenal reportedly had the money to make a big signing, given the Vlahovic pursuit, and obviously given that they had plenty of squad spaces cleared up, they chose to not sign anyone, despite links to guys like Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Arthur, Alex Isak. So yeah, I mean, Aidan, let me start with you, who you're an Arsenal fan like me. What are you thinking in terms of short term? Like, how does this window bode for our top 4 chances?
Yeah, I mean, short term, I don't think it's great. I was kind of disappointed that I made like a little thread of my predictions for top 4, which is something like, or top 6, which I don't really like to do before the end of the January transfer window for this exact reason. I mean, going into January 1st, I would have said that Arsenal were a complete lock for top 4, because it felt almost, at least the way that we were led to believe by people in media, whoever you want to say, people who are just, tweeting fake stuff. It seemed very likely that we were targeting a midfielder at least, and potentially a starting striker. And I think about, towards the last 2 weeks of the window, the midfielder links kind of disappeared. Maybe it was a little bit later than that, but that kind of became okay. As the Vlahovic links heated up, it's like, okay, this is who we're going for. At the very least, we're going for this. I also felt like there was maybe I was led to believe that there was this Alexander Isak like plan B that was also like a foolproof plan. I don't know why I felt that way, but I think maybe it was because of the stuff that like Newcastle was doing in the window, for example, that I felt like, okay, well, like Arsenal surely have a plan B if they don't land this guy that they want for 75. If they're going for him for 75, they should have 75 for the release clause of Isak. Although there's also reports that it was maybe higher than that it was maybe 90. Actually, no, I guess it was 75 million pounds in that range. But obviously, we found out now. We know that they just didn't think he was worth it, and I kind of agree with that. Now that things have settled down, I kind of agree that he isn't necessarily worth the price tag. But in terms of what this does for the chances at top four, it just seems it's very risky given the players that are the backups that we have at this point and the way that they have performed when a main player has been injured. That's my main reason. I don't actually think the lack of goals from Lacazette and Nketiah will matter so much because of how good our defense is. But what happens if Tomiyasu stays injured or can't recover, or he comes back slow, or he needs a couple games even? And what happens if Xhaka or Partey are out for whatever reason it is? How do we play a three-man midfield without any clinical goal scorers through the center? It just doesn't really, to me, make sense. So it's going to be harder. If everybody stays fit, it will happen, but COVID's still going on too. And so there's so many factors that can keep a player out of a game now, more than there was a year or two ago even. And I think that will make it hard for Arsenal to hit top four with the window we just had.
Yeah. I mean, definitely you're right there. And I think obviously the staying fit part is like the big one here. It's the main point of the discussion, because sure, Arsenal have shown that they are a top four level team when they're fit and firing, like especially when they had their midfield duo together, Xhaka and Partey, who are the two most important players in the team probably. But at this point, like most of the starting 11 is the most important player of the team. Like, I mean, if Tomiyasu gets injured, if White gets injured, if Ramsdale gets injured, there's a lot of that. Whereas if you look at teams like some of the other teams, I think they have more. They have less players who they rely so much on. I mean, less positions that they only have one great option in, and I think that unfortunately could be the downfall of Arsenal this season. In terms of like if they stay fit, I think they could do it, but like again, even if they stay fit, there's this question of, do you trust Lacazette and Nketiah and potentially Martinelli playing as a number 9, which is untested? Do you trust them to deliver the goals and the overall play needed to get top 4 over the likes of Harry Kane and Cristiano Ronaldo and Romelu Lukaku? I mean, that's your competition there, and it's going to be very, very interesting. And I mean, Rafael, do you have anything to say here?
I mean, Aiden pretty much touched on everything.
Yeah,
that's needed to be said. I think this was the kind of window of opportunity, literally the window of opportunity for Arsenal to get themselves into some sort of position to challenge for the top 4 in these last few months. Obviously, getting knocked out of the FA Cup to Nottingham Forest and leaving the Carabao Cup to Liverpool meant that the Premier League was your only kind of competition left. So it meant that I can kind of see from Arsenal's point of view, like Arteta's point of view, to not spend heavily in a window where you're not really looking to make heavy investments yet. But the striker pursuit was very public, and obviously Vlahovic going to Juventus was a big miss. And now that Partey and Elneny are back from AFCON, it seems Arsenal should just be kind of just content really in the squad and hope that it's enough to see you through the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough, definitely. And we all knew that. It's just that with Arsenal fans on Twitter, the expectations have changed mid-season. So in August, if you ask most people, they would tell you top 4 was impossible. And now they tell you they're like top 4 or Arteta gets sacked. It's the expectations have changed. And so, and then, as Aiden said, there was a lot of fuel from the media going around. Lots of accounts, not just like Arsenal fans, but like big journalists linking us with gigantic moves that in the end didn't prove either. I mean, in Vlahovic's case, I guess it proved unsuccessful. In most other cases, it was like complete fabrication, I guess. So that way, even I don't think before the window everyone expected big movement, but like when on literally the first day of the window we're linked with the hottest striker in Europe right now, everyone starts expecting huge stuff. So yeah, I mean that was unfortunate. But in another club who I think had a very, very similar window was United, because obviously United, they did not bring any signings in right now. They're going to contribute right now, despite a lot of links, especially in midfield. They were linked to the likes of Boubacar Kamara, Haidara from Leipzig, and then I'm missing one. Oh, Zakaria from Gladbach, who went to Juventus in the end. And but they ended up signing no one in midfield, and they ended up losing quite a few players. Obviously, the big one was Anthony Martial going along to Sevilla. Well, actually, the big one was Mason Greenwood, but yeah, I mean that's another situation. But I think we can be sure that he's not going to play for the rest of the season at least. And then Donny van de Beek to Everton. I think that was it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did they lose any other players? Amad Diallo. To Rangers. So yeah, they lost a lot of attacking depth, and they didn't add any players in midfield, which is basically the opposite of Arsenal. Like they lost depth in midfield and backline, and they didn't add in up front where they needed. So, and if you have any thoughts on this and how, again, it's mostly I'm trying to relate this to how it impacts the top four race, which I think right now it's been established that there's a 3-man grouping under the top three, which is a 3-team grouping rather, which is United, Chelsea, and Tottenham. Obviously, West Ham are in there. We can talk about them if we want to, but they did not make any transfers as well. So, again, any thoughts here from Aiden or you, Rafael?
I mean, from a United fan's expectation, as I am, I think this was a window we expected. Obviously, Ralph Ragnick's interim until the season, and whether he goes on to be in a consultancy role or indeed goes on to be the permanent manager, we'll see. Anthony Martial, Donny van de Beek, Ahmad, all leaving was kind of obvious from the start of the window. They wanted to go get some game time. They weren't playing. So I don't think Manchester United have a lot to worry about in terms of depth. We still got Cavani, Rashford, Ronaldo, Sancho, Bruno, Pogba, obviously Mason Greenwood, but that will be something that will be dealt with later on. But I think, yeah, the whole midfield links were a bit similar to Arsenal with the striker links. A bit was fabrication, a bit was real. I don't think we were ever in for Kamara. I don't think that was something Manchester United were really looking at. Haidara is someone that Ragnick really liked, but I do think from the board's point of view, Declan Rice is their top target, and it's someone that they're going to look to push really hard for in the summer, whether that is a realistic deal to do or not. And yeah, from all the kind of coming ins, there was no incomings that we were really expecting. Zakaria seemed like a good deal and an obvious deal to do, but it seemed that there wasn't much convinced on the board to do that type of deal. And yeah, in terms of outgoings, yeah, it was pretty much a standard Manchester United window. Don't get anything done effectively, but yeah, just worry until the next window.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I think, United have kind of ended this window at where they began it almost. Like they've gotten some wages off the books, which is important, but a lot of people saw it coming. And I think the most important issue for them will continue to be how do they make the team work with the players they have right now. And I think that's been like the challenge for the last 3 or 4 years. It's felt like, okay, these guys have all the talent that they need to win something and to really push for something, but can they get everything right at the same time, And that's something that is like, it's hard to do. It's hard to recruit a good team. Then it's hard to make them play really well together. And it's also hard to then win trophies. Those are like feel like three separate things almost. You have to get them all right to accomplish that one thing. And so, it's always going to be a big challenge. But I think that sums up the window pretty well.
Spot on. You're both spot on. I think, as I said, it's very similar situation to Arsenal. But I guess the main difference here is that Arsenal have a bit more urgency to make Champions League given how long they've been out. So I don't think it would be as disastrous if United missed out on Champions League football as it would be for Arsenal. And also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I have seen people saying, and I think it's accurate, that United board tends to spend more money when they miss out on Champions League, like that in the past. Yeah, in the past decade or so. So I don't know. Maybe if you're a United fan, you'll be rooting for Europa League so Arsenal can get the Champions League. But yeah, maybe that would be a bit too nice. Anyway, yeah, I don't think any of the rest of the top six made any like big business. Oh, I mean, the one signing that was interesting was Luis Diaz to Liverpool. I mean, he's not a player that I've watched too much, so I won't comment. But has any of you watched him particularly?
Well, I haven't watched much of him, but I think if I'm a Liverpool fan, I'm very excited about this deal. He seems like the perfect Sadio Mane replacement, 25-year-old, who is an absolute dribble monster from what we've seen. And he's like a YouTube highlights player, really, isn't he? In that you can see from all the comp makers, he's a guy that they're the first to make a video about. Yeah, from the Portuguese point of view, from what they're saying, he's the best player in that league, and this move was kind of expected. And yeah, I think he's gonna have to bide his time, of course, to get in there. But he seems like when Jota came in that summer, in a couple of months, I can definitely see him finding his feet and be one of the Premier League's most exciting wingers.
Yeah, Liverpool did really well. I feel like they're like refreshing their squad really smartly. And I think that another element of that is just like they play so many games because they're in all the competitions. A guy like Jota, for example, who's technically the fourth forward on that list, in the starting list, he can still do things like, play in an important semifinal against Arsenal and score 2 really important goals. And like, he's not, he's having a good time in that team, because he's able to do those things. Even if he's not playing 50 games, he's able to affect, have really important moments.
Okay, so I think the other main interesting talking point and the other interesting race in the Premier League, because other than the top 4 race, I mean, because the title race is pretty much decided at this point, I think the other big important race is the relegation battle. But before we get into that, I think the one interesting club that is between top 4 or top 6 and the relegation battle, so not really threatening for either, is Aston Villa, and they had a very interesting window. I mean, they've obviously shown a lot of ambition the past few years. I mean, even before this summer, they had I think 1 or 2 summers where they spent 100 million, and even after losing Grealish, they reinvested the money, and now they've strengthened further in January. I mean, obviously, Felipe Coutinho is the very big one that they did this January, which is going to be very interesting to see how it pans out, because obviously he's a player that I mean has kind of fallen out of the footballing map the past few years. Like no one, he didn't really play for Barcelona that much. His move was a total failure, I think it's fair to say. And but he's being now given another chance in the league that he shined for Liverpool, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he does. And on a loan deal, obviously, but they do have an option. And the other big, and they also added 2 fullbacks. Lucas Digne, obviously from Everton, for around £25 million, I think, which is interesting because Gerrard generally plays a system that relies a lot on his fullbacks and especially the left back to be a creative force down the side. And then the other one, who is a right back, Callum Chambers from Arsenal, on a free transfer. Again, interesting because he's not like Digne. He's a bit of he's a different option. He's more of a deep fullback who can play as a center back as well. And it's interesting because I think I've watched most of Villa's games since Gerrard took over, and I still think he's trying to strike the perfect balance in terms of how he wants to line up his system. Because, like, especially I think his front line and then the way he structures his fullback and his midfield, it's really it hasn't really been consistent. Like in one game, you'll see playing split strikers, Ings and Watkins with Buendia as a false nine. The other time you'll see like more of a diamond. The other time you'll see them playing two wingers between the lines, like Chelsea do with a striker up front. Like he's used Buendia, Watkins between the lines. He's used many different options and Hazard and Coutinho now. And then in terms of his fullbacks, he places them very high up the pitch. I mean, it's funny because like people talk about the fullbacks in Liverpool system being not really fullbacks because they play so high up the pitch, and I think that's kind of exaggerated. But if you actually look at Villa, the fullbacks are extremely high up the pitch. Like if you look at them building up, you can see like basically the left central midfielder, which is usually Jacob Ramsey, playing at the left back zone, and the left back, which was Target, who left to Newcastle and was replaced by Digne, playing essentially as the left winger, and similar on the right. But I think that has varied a bit. Like we've seen the fullback starting from deeper and letting the right number 8, which is usually Sanson or McGinn, playing further forward. So it's interesting. I think obviously Gerrard, he's an inexperienced coach. He did extremely well with Rangers, but it's his first big top 5 league job, and he's gone straight at an ambitious club in the Premier League, which is obviously a very difficult challenge for an inexperienced coach like him. I think he's done well so far, but it's going to be very interesting to see how he fits all those pieces he has. I mean, even then, they still wanted midfielders that were linked with Bissouma, with Betancourt. So I don't know. Any thoughts that you guys have on these signings and how and whether Villa can actually have like a very strong ending to the season, getting them close to the top 6, potentially more realistically top 8. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, you can go.
I talked a little bit about. I wrote an article a few months ago about why Dean Smith was not doing well, and I think that the main reason for Smith's downfall was that he kind of just couldn't coach the system that he was trying to coach. He was trying to coach this sort of quite fluid, I think, a little too fluid at times system where, the team defends in this really sort of rigid block out of possession, but then in possession, they sort of don't have an idea of exactly where to be. The fullbacks sometimes were too deep, sometimes they were too high. They didn't have clear instructions. They didn't always look confident playing the ball into the box. Should they play the ball into the box? Should they combine on the outside with somebody like Watkins or even Ings? And that led to his downfall. And what Gerrard has done is he's instilled attacking patterns that you talked to, Nick, that are really what are the thing that were needed to unlock that Villa team, because they have a lot of good attacking quality. They have a lot of players who are attacking players. Before even bringing in Coutinho, they had, both their fullbacks are attacking fullbacks. And that's the case now. They've just upgraded on Target, but Target is an attacking fullback or was an attacking fullback for them. But Buendia is a hyper-aggressive player. They have 2 forwards who are comfortable coming deep and moving. So there are guys who naturally run a lot and they like to link play. And I think that what Gerrard has just done is given them a little bit more structure going forward. So you see, when they're going forward, you can see a sort of very similar shape, pretty much no matter what. There's somebody that he wants to occupy in certain zones. You talked about the fullbacks being really high and wide, and that sort of provides the base for the rest of the offense. I think that's been the best thing that they've upgraded on. The thing that I worry about is that Gerrard really likes Douglas Luiz. And it's not that I don't think Douglas Luiz is a good player. I just think that in the Premier League, his physical attributes do not lend themselves well to playing as a lone 6 without 2 center backs that are very comfortable playing a high line. And he doesn't have that because Tyrone Mings is not that player. I don't know who he's planning to replace him with. I'm trying to see if they actually did sign. Did they sign a center back?
I mean, Chambers can be a center back.
Technically, they signed Chambers. I mean, again, you're right. Chambers can be a center back, but I don't know if I really, just my personal opinion, I've always seen him more as a right back or, a central defensive midfielder even. So that part is the thing that he's going to have to get right in the coming windows. He's going to have to replace Tyrone Mings, who is just not good enough, not consistent enough as a highline center back in the league. He gets caught out too much. He has lots of gaps that you see when he's looking over his shoulder. And that is the thing that's going to kill them, is that they're maybe going to score more goals now. They already have. And sometimes that's enough to beat a lot of those teams that they're in and around in the middle of the table. But if they want to go higher than that, they need to have a stronger defensive core.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. I think the Douglas Luiz point is an interesting one because they were chasing Bissouma. And I think that's someone Gerrard wanted to get in and potentially replace Douglas Luiz. And I think if they got Bissouma, Arsenal were linked to Douglas Luiz, that maybe would have freed up that type of transfer. On Tyrone Mings, I think Sven Botman would be an interesting and a great replacement, actually. Left-footed centre-back. He's comfortable in playing in a mid to low block at Lille as well. And I feel like if they were to get someone like that in, that would be a really great piece of business. And yeah, on the whole formation, Gerrard seems to be leaning towards more of a 4-3-2-1, kind of a Christmas tree formation where he's playing with 2 double tens, a striker, and 3 central midfielders. And I feel that will benefit them in the long run, having Digne and Cash high and wide, Buendia and Coutinho as a double tens, and Watkins as the striker. And yeah, I feel with Gerrard, the window has been a good one. It's actually been a really good one. Getting in a left back in Digne and a 10 in Coutinho, where these are very high quality players that maybe a few years ago Villa just wouldn't be able to attract. And yeah, it's going to be interesting how they go into next season. I think this season is just about finishing as high as possible, and next season there'll be a real ambition to push for Europe.
Yeah, I mean, you're right there. And I think without further ado, I think we have to get into the relegation battle in the Premier League, because it's extremely interesting, because there were a lot of teams that did a lot of business, and some interesting business as well. So I think the big one obviously is Newcastle, who have a lot of new money in their book, and they obviously invested heavily in the January market. I think they were by far the highest spending team in the world, I think, this window. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they were. So in terms of high-profile signings, obviously the big one, Bruno Guimaraes from Lille, has been pretty much linked to every major club in Europe. A player that fans love on Twitter, and very, very interesting signing. I mean, I think it's starting up as a £40 million around there, and it could go higher in add-ons, and a 30% sell-on clause. So that's an interesting and very expensive signing in the end, because I think a lot of people, especially Arsenal fans that want the player, thought that, oh, he's available for 30 million. But like, as time went by, as the deal got closer, the fee started going higher and higher. Another high-profile signing was Kieran Trippier for Atletico, very experienced right back, on the wrong side of 30 though. England international, only £13 million, which is a very good deal. Chris Wood from Burnley, another similar one. English, 30 years old though, and very expensive, expensive relative to, I think, his quality and his age profile, £25 million. But they did weaken a relegation rival. I think that was really the main point of the deal. Matt Targett, obviously, from Aston Villa, we talked about him, an attacking left back. Dan Burn from Brighton for around £10 million. A very, very tall centre back or / left back. Around, I think he's 6'6" or 6'7". I think that's about it. I don't think they made any other signings. But I think so. To give my take on this, I think Newcastle are in a very tough place actually at the moment, because they do have all this money, and I think ideally, if you land yourself in charge of a team that's kind of lacks direction, like they're not very ambitious in general, and they don't have a lot of money, and they don't have a lot of young talent as well. So you land at this team. So what you look at, essentially in the beginning, the first thing you look at, what I would do personally, is get tons of young talent, ambitious, that will be there for years, and eventually will complement your big money signings when you're at a place where you can attract these names. The problem though with Newcastle is that they're in a relegation battle. So you can't just sign 20-year-old French midfielders and like expect them to like carry you to the top 8 inside like this season. It's a very tough place. Like they obviously tried to blend in the young talent, which they didn't really end up getting. Like they were linked to many youngsters, exciting, but they didn't really end up getting anyone other than Bruno Guimaraes, who is 24. It's not like he's 19. And I think the other question here is Eddie Howe the long-term manager? Because if you're giving someone like around 100 million in January to save your club from relegation, I mean, that's really the distinction. Are you giving him that money to save you from relegation? Is he the correct coach to do that, or is he actually the man that you're going to back in the long term to take you to the promised land? So it's interesting because they made a lot of signings, but I'm not sure how they're going to fit. I think the two questions here are whether they are a good fit, dynamics and in tactics wise, whether Bruno fits with Willock and Shelvey and all the midfielders, whether Dan Burn fits with our other center backs. A lot of tactical questions, but also do they fit in? Is Eddie Howe the right man to take them forward and after keeping them from relegation? So I'd like to know your thoughts on that. Like, how does this window, this exciting window, how does this bode for does it save their short term? And if it does, where does it leave them like next season if they manage to stay in the Premier League? So Aidan, give me your thoughts on that, please.
I think, to answer the sort of question about Eddie Howe first and foremost, just because I think that it's an interesting one for me, because I really liked his team at Bournemouth when he brought them up and had them in the Premier League. They finished 9th one year before they went back down. He's a good attacking coach. He knows how to coach and attack. They score a lot of goals. They're really fun to watch. They play free-flowing football. They play really fast. They played really hard. That's how his teams looked at Bournemouth, and you can see some moments of that in Newcastle. He's already instilled a little bit more. I think like his manager bounce maybe is still going on, and so he's that there's a little extra effort happening. But I think new signings only add to that. But I don't know if he's the right specialist. He's definitely not a defensive specialist. And so what this feels like to me, to answer the second question about the dynamics and about getting staying up, it feels like typically in this situation, owners will look for a manager or the board will look for a manager in this situation who has experience keeping teams up. And that's the typical way of doing it. At least in England, it is. I mean, Watford have just signed Roy Hodgson. They had Ranieri before then. Last season, West Brom tried to do it with Sam Allardyce, but it kind of hasn't really worked in the last few years. And so I'm wondering if they're trying to flip the script and say, okay, we've got a lot of money now. Let's get an attacking coach in and then give him a bunch of new, kind of exciting, forward-thinking players, offensive-thinking players, or a couple at least, and see if he can actually, instead of conceding as little as possible and staying up that way, scrapping points, let's see if he can kind of blow the smaller teams out of the water who we know don't have as much spending power and kind of just like blast their way up to 17th or 16th, and then we go from there. So in that way, I think Eddie Howe is a long-term thought, because if this team adds a really good right winger or even a really good left winger to it, maybe upgrades a little bit on the striker position, but their strikers are, I think, decent now, and then gets a pure defensively solid number 6 and a good goalkeeper, which again, they signed like 10 players. It's not like they can't go do that in the summertime with more time and the same amount of money. That team will stay in the Premier League very easily. They'll look similar to how Newcastle has looked for most of the Premier League era, which is a mid-table team. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for them. But I think the big issue will be, winning games now. And so it's a bit confusing on that end, but in my opinion, it's a new approach to, succeeding in a relegation battle in a way that we haven't seen in a while. I mean, in a little bit at least in the Premier League.
Yeah, Raphael, thoughts on Newcastle's transfer strategy, and do you think they're saying no?
Well, Aiden kind of he touched on everything pretty well, especially the Eddie Howe situation and whether he's a long-term the right man to go forward. I think with Newcastle, I think now that the transfer window is over and the whole focus is now on the relegation battle, I think they really need to gain some structure, especially in the board, get a CEO, get a director of football, get a few scouts who can find you, because I think one thing with Newcastle in the long term they need to watch out for is being they could be done for in deals like the Bruno Guimaraes deal is an example of a deal where Lyon getting a 30% sell-on clause is something that you shouldn't really be looking to give up. I think Dan Burn for what potentially could look for 18 million for a guy who's going to turn 30 in May is kind of a bit of too much. And again, Chris Wood seemed more like weakening Burnley more than strengthening Newcastle. But yeah, in my opinion, I think Eddie Howe right now could potentially keep him in the Premier League. Long term, I don't think he's the right man. I think he's offensive approaches is good on the eye. It's progressive. It's what everyone wants to be. But I think defensively, he struggled at Bournemouth, especially to the end. And I think if that's one thing Newcastle are going to have to gain is some defensive structure. And I don't think Eddie Howe will be able to give that to them in the long term. I think, interestingly, I know he has been sacked, but I think Rafa Benitez would have been the type of move they should have made, actually. A guy who's defensively strong. Yes, he will kind of neglect the offensive in some parts of the game, but I think if they got Rafa Benitez to steady the ship until the end and potentially go for someone like a Graham Potter, who is that long-term manager, I think that would have been a more ideal situation. But yeah, I think they should, with the signings they've made, they should definitely be looking to stay up now. And yeah, I think I can see Newcastle staying in the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you said it. They should be staying up. I think they probably will. If I had to bet right now, I'd bet on them staying up. But there's just this part of me that could go away that's saying this has like disaster potential, because these too many new players, a new coach that has not proven to be adaptable in a relegation battle. He's kind of like an identity attacking philosophy type of coach. And lots of new players, not many good ones in terms of the ones that were already there. So this could go wrong. But I mean, again, even if they go down, they're just gonna have so much money, and they're probably gonna get back up immediately. So obviously they should stay up. They should stay up. But even if they go down, it's gonna be an inconvenience. But they will be back up quickly. Just gonna delay their project for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other Premier League team, Premier League relegation threatened team that made some very interesting moves in the window, pretty much similar situation to Newcastle, because they're a huge club, huge club relative to the others in the battle, and they have quite a bit of money and a decent pool in general. They're a big club that can attract better players than a Burnley or Southampton can. That's obviously Everton, and Everton. They spent so much money the last few years, and it's mostly been on players that have either proven to be not good enough, or that have just not managed to fit in with what the club is trying to do. And I think a lot of that has been that the club has been directionless. They've been getting in high-profile coaches like Ancelotti, like Rafa Benitez, these are the type of coaches that are going to need a lot of money to take you like to a top 4 battle. And Everton, with how badly they've spent in the past, they've not been able to provide these managers with that kind of money. And obviously, the other option was to, at some point, get a project coach, and they did exactly do that. And they did get Frank Lampard, who has been out of a job for the last year after getting sacked at Chelsea. And it's a very interesting one, because they made a few signings as well, it's, to me, these sort of signings again don't really scream direction. I don't know if you think otherwise, but like getting it's not a unique opinion, but like it seems to me baffling why they got both Van de Beek and Dele Alli. Not that they cost much, but these are the kind of signings that it's just players are not going to play together. And Lampard has the sort of history of playing those types of players together at Chelsea with Havertz and Mount playing in midfield. It's interesting. They did make some other good signings as well. They got a pair of new fullbacks, which they badly needed. Vitaly Mykolenko from Dynamo Kyiv for around £20 million, and Nathan Patterson from Rangers for around 10 million, I think. So both players who young, 22 or under. So they, as I said, they really needed fullbacks. They also added Anwar El Ghazi from Aston Villa on a loan deal after losing Luka Dean there, who obviously was a big miss. Again, I really, to be honest, I can't see this going too well, especially in the short term. But I think they have enough quality to like stay up. So like, Rafa, what are your thoughts on Lampard as a coach, and do you think those signings give him a good chance of succeeding at Everton?
First of all, Lampard as a coach, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting decision for Frank Lampard to take the Everton job. He's rejected jobs such as Crystal Palace and whatnot. So I think it is interesting for him to take Everton, but he's taking it now, so we should see what he does. The signings he's made, Donny van der Beek and Dele Alli, are very interesting. It's interesting how they'll play. Like you said, he did something similar with Mount and Havertz at Chelsea in playing as the 2-8s. I don't think he will be able to do that at Everton, especially in the situation they're in. I think having Donny van der Beek is brilliant. He can play as an 8, he can play as a 10, and in around the box. Dele Alli is an interesting situation because he's probably more of a second striker. That's where he's played his best football. And if you're going to play him as a second striker, maybe behind a Calvert-Lewin, then you're going to have to transition the way you play your midfield. So whether that's Doucouré and Allen, with Ali in front of them. So, and yeah, obviously the two fullbacks were badly needed, especially younger fullbacks with Seamus Coleman, Adrian, and Lucas Digne going to Aston Villa. And yeah, I think with Everton, I can't see him getting relegated. I can't see how a team with so much talent in the likes of Rockhausen, Demarai Gray, Calvert-Lewin obviously coming back into it, falls into that relegation. But I think in the long term, there's going to have to be a change in direction and in vision. And losing the likes of Marcel Brands will be interesting how they replace him.
Aiden, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you both said, because I just think at the end of the day, yeah, like I don't really understand the direction either, the thought process behind some of the signings. I would have thought that it's ironic, like you mentioned Crystal Palace and Lampard being linked to Crystal Palace. It's like, I feel like if Lampard played at Crystal Palace now, like, or if Lampard managed at Crystal Palace, they would look so much different than they do now, and it would be interesting to see what he would do, because they're almost opposite teams. I feel like Crystal Palace are really good at attacking the wide areas, and Lampard wants to play this, feels like a kind of a narrow structure with a striker who is really good at getting on the end of crosses. But you brought in two kind of new fullbacks who you don't really know exactly how well they're going to immediately transition into the Premier League, and so it'll be interesting to see if they can provide that delivery and that service. And I don't see them going down because of their quality, but I will be really interesting to see how they play, because it's just like, I don't know, maybe Lampard just unorthodox, or maybe he just, I mean, personally, I just don't know if he necessarily has had the experience yet to really figure out the system that he wants to play. I think he's playing with a specific style just to play with a specific style, because he feels like that's kind of like how you're supposed to do it. But I don't really see a ton of rhyme or reason to it. He hasn't really drastically improved teams that he's gone to in the short term. But like you guys said, they have so much quality. Like, there's no way they go down, right? Like, they've got so many good attacking players, and they have at least decent defenders. It'd be one thing if they were like Newcastle, where they have good forward players, but their defense is just like, you don't understand what's happening there. At least their defenders are pretty good. Pickford's number one for England, and stuff like that. So yeah, I think they'll stay up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. It's just looking at their team, it's just hard to look past Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison, because as a front two or even as a front three with Demarai Gray, who's been amazing this season, they just guarantee you goals. And I mean, that's what you need to stay up. You just need goals. And but at the end, it's the midfield, because I really don't know what he's gonna try or what he's gonna do, because like if he wants to try that disastrous double 10 system that he did at Chelsea, he's going to need a lone six, which doesn't really exist at the moment at Everton. I mean, they're midfielders. I mean, at least Alan and Doucouré, both of them. Doucouré is also injured as well as Fabian Delph. So that's two less options right now. And Alan, Doucouré, Andre Gomez, those guys are really more front-footed players, especially when defending. They look to, especially Alan and Doucouré, they look to win the ball high up the pitch, and then and they're all, and sort of like box to box shuttlers. Like Alan essentially is like a very poor man's N'Golo Kante, right? And Doucouré more of a forward thinking player, but still Andre Gomez not really a sitter as well, more of a box option. And then Van de Beek and Ali. Van de Beek has some experience playing deeper, but I think everyone would prefer him as a second striker or as a number 10, more traditional. And then Dele Alli, at this point in his career, nobody really knows what he is, but I think the past has shown that he's clearly best playing off a guy like Calvert-Lewin. That would be a great fit, but then the question is, how do you fit Van de Beek into this? How do you fit Richarlison if you want to play essentially a front two of Calvert-Lewin and Dele? So yeah.
I also sorry.
Yeah,
I also think it's kind of Frank Lampard at Chelsea. Many of the fans were saying he wanted to play more of a possession-based side, and I also think it's interesting for a team who looks pretty much set up to be very direct, skip the midfield and go straight to the striking Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very interesting how he kind of he implements that type of style. He said in his interview that the board were sold by his vision and the way he wanted to play. So I think it's going to be intriguing to see how he gets players such as Michael Keane, Yerry Mina to play out from the back, and to have someone like Calvert-Lewin to probably play more to his feet. So yeah, that'll be very intriguing.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk Premier League wise, but I think we've covered the more interesting business that was done. I mean, Burnley and other relegation battle, we talked about them losing Chris Wood, but they replaced him with I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but Weghorst, I think, from Wolfsburg, who is a similar player, big target at 6'6". That's going to be interesting because he's like, Newcastle could have bought him. That was the thing, but instead they chose to Chris Wood, but to weaken Burnley. But they did replace him with potentially a better player. But obviously we're gonna have to see how he adjusts. So aside from that, I think we could go to Europe right now, to the rest of Europe. I mean, we can't talk about everyone because we don't have the time. But I think the place that we want to start over here, which was the club that did the most interesting business, the most high-profile business, was Barcelona. Obviously, brought in 3 Premier League forwards: Adama Traore, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Adama was on a loan with a 20 million euro option, I think, and then Aubameyang was a free transfer, and Ferran Torres as well on a 55 million euro deal from Manchester City. Those were their main signings, and they add them to a front line with so many players at this point. I mean, they have Ansu Fati, they have Luke de Jong, Memphis Depay, Braithwaite, Ousmane Dembele. They have a couple of La Masia youngsters that have been playing a lot of minutes in the front line. So I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. It feels typical Barcelona, but I think with Xavi and their revamped philosophy, maybe it goes well. But I don't know, Aiden. What do you think of the direction Barcelona is taking as a club?
Yeah, some of the signings are really interesting. In particular, the Adama signing is interesting. And I remember trying to kind of find information on Xavi's like philosophy, and watching some clips of how his team played, the team that he was at before, and I forget the name. Is it Al Saad? And that he was coaching before. I don't know exactly the name of the team, but it was interesting to hear him talk about the way that he wants to set up, and the way that he set up before was in a 3-4-3 with 3 center backs and wing backs wide. And so I'm wondering if he's feeling like to sort of stem the bleeding of Barcelona's form, which has been just really bad. Even it feels like it almost doesn't really have anything to do with him that much. I mean, they played really, really well against Real Madrid, but they lost that game quite recently. I mean, I remember Dembele dropped like a masterclass in that game. He was incredible, untouchable, but didn't create a goal or assist. There just wasn't really like, I mean, he basically created the first goal for Barcelona, but there wasn't like just, it feels like their form is not necessarily their fault almost. It's like they just have been a little cursed kind of recently in some ways. And I think that to pick up that form, maybe going back to a little bit more of a defensive system. I'll be honest with you, I don't really know the quality of the defenders that they have on the books. I know they have, guys like Piqué who just feel like, I don't know why he's still playing football anymore. He feels like most of his life is off the pitch, that we hear about him. Dani Alves is back in the setup, but he's playing a much more, I feel like a kind of a more attacking role sometimes in midfield as well. He's been really, really good though. And I think it's just interesting to see like if they do go to a wingback system with Adama as the right wingback there and how he'll function, because he has the quality to help them produce goals, especially with Aubameyang in the team. That link up could be very, very useful. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm not really sure what the plan is, but I'll be interested to see how Barcelona feel actually quite similar to Everton in the sense that they are, doing really big, flashy things, but they haven't really succeeded in the last few seasons in what they're trying to
do. Rafael, any thoughts on Barca?
Well, I've not got much to add. I think Aiden said it quite well. It's more just flashy business than smart business. It's a bizarre group of players to bring in. Ferran Torres made the most sense, obviously. A guy who can come in, score goals, versatile player. Aubameyang made very little sense in terms of his age profile and also his actual quality now. But yeah, it should be interesting to see what they do in the future, especially with the financial problems that is publicly known. But yeah, it seems with Barcelona, everything just seems to be bizarre from one way to another, really.
I mean, yeah, 100%. And I mean, even though they signed 3 good players, like no one can deny that, but like it's with how many forwards they have, you just like, I mean, even Dembele was supposed to leave, but he stayed. It's just, you don't really see where this is going in terms of like having a coherent plan. I mean, even the players that they brought in, those guys can play many positions, each one of them, but which is a good thing. But sometimes, I feel like that's the problem with Barcelona's front line. They have too many players that don't really have a set role or position that are best suited at this point. I mean, or at the system. I mean, Aubameyang, do you want him to be as a wide outlet at this point in his career? No. Is he the center forward that you would want, especially particularly like in a positional play system like Xavi wants to play? Maybe if you can get him just on the end of many cutbacks and through balls and such, but he's not really ideal for that. Like a system that you want to build up short and like play break down low blocks. And then Ferran Torres, he's a player that I find very overrated, especially by Barcelona fans, but I think he's going to be good for them because I don't think he's ever going to be a star winger for them, but he can easily replicate the role of a guy like Pedro that had during his Barcelona days, because he's very intelligent positionally, and has a good goal sense, playing either out wide or up front. Just don't think he's going to be a star for them because he doesn't really have any big creative chops or like elite 1v1 ability. So I just think he's gonna be a good player for them. But like he's the sort of player that needs someone like Messi next to him, right? And they don't really have that kind of profile anymore. Depay, I guess, was supposed to be something like that, but he's not really been great. And Adama Traore, I really don't think he was a good signing. I mean, it's only a loan, but I think they kind of misprofiled him here. Like he obviously, like Xavi in his positional play season, he wants wingers high and wide that will attack 1v1 from out to in and deliver the ball to the box. But Adama Traore, he's not really that kind of player. He's one of the best, one of the best in the world in terms of 1v1 dribbling, but he's not the kind of dribbler that you want to have in the touchline and to cut in and deliver the ball, because first of all, his delivery is not great, and then also I think his dribbling, I think his value as a dribbler comes mostly for as a progressor, like carrying the ball up the field. So in a sense, he fits very well in a mid-table team that needs a star technical player that's going to get the ball up the field. But as a final third player, I think he leaves a lot to be desired. So maybe it's going to work out, maybe it won't, but it still feels like Barcelona is worlds away from being like a very, very good team, like an elite team. It feels like it's going to take a few years. And I'm not sure the decisions that they're taking right now, I'm not sure they're entirely helping towards that long-term goal. All right, so after that, I think a good place to go is Juventus, another one of those high-profile declining sort of clubs that made big business like Barcelona. Obviously, the big one is Dusan Vlahovic from Fiorentina, a transfer saga that pretty much lasted the entire month, and he ended up going there after numerous links to mostly Arsenal and other Premier League teams. 75 million euros, I think, ended up being the final fee. And we're sure also that I don't know what's been reported exactly, but we can be sure that there were a lot of agent fees as well involved, as well as a high salary. And they also signed Denis Zakaria from Gladbach, a Swiss midfielder. For I think his contract was expiring in the summer. Actually, I think he was picked up for a very cheap fee, like 8 million euros. So I think that the interesting thing here is like, actually, where I want to start is like what their intention is long term, because obviously they're not at this point, they're not the club that can spend like they don't have the spending power of the other teams that are going to compete with in Europe, like Madrid, like Man City, like Man United, right? Or even Inter probably at this point. But and you look at how they managed to attract Vlahovic, which is normal, I guess, because like most people that grow up playing football in Italy, they wanna join Juventus. That's fine, but like what Vlahovic choosing Juve made me consider was like what's their long-term future? Like who, if you look at their squad, how many exciting young players do they have? And the list is like it's shorter than you may think. I mean, if you look at it, I think obviously De Ligt is a big part of their project, who they spend a lot of money on, and he's going to be there for a few years. And then the other high-profile name is Federico Chiesa, who obviously suffered an ACL injury, and this is very unfortunate because as well as missing out on the rest of the season, we're really not sure how he's going to come back. Like especially for like players that rely on athleticism, agility, explosiveness, first step, all that. It really doesn't the ACL really impacts their game. So maybe it's fair to question whether Chiesa will ever be back to the same level he was before suffering his injury. And then I mean they have some other interesting young players like Moise Kean up front, and obviously Locatelli is a very good player as well, 24 years old. Who they signed for big money from Sassuolo in the summer. So I guess my question to you, Rafael, is like, do you think Vlahovic was right to choose Juve? And like now that he's joined them, what's the next step for them? Do they keep investing in young stars, or because like you also have to think that like their old guard is retiring right now. I mean, Buffon left. I mean, sort of. He's 33 anyway. But like Chiellini and Bonucci, I imagine they don't have many years left. Guys like Marquinhos and Pirlo are long gone. So like, what's next for Juve?
Well, I think for Juventus, first of all, Vlahovic is a really good deal. They needed a striker because Morata just wasn't doing it. Ever since Ronaldo left, it almost felt that Juventus's goal scoring has massively dropped, as you would expect. I think a real problem in that team is fullbacks really, and their midfield. I think their midfield lacks an identity. Allegri has been playing somewhat of a 4-4-2, having Rabiot play as a left winger and McKennie play as a right winger, and Dybala and Morata play up top. And it's a lot mixed. There's some real good players there in De Ligt, Dybala, Vlahovic now, Chiesa. When he comes back from Musea, I'm fully expecting him to still be as productive as he was before. But as far as from Juventus, it's going to be interesting how they move forward. I personally don't think Allegri is the right man to take him forward. I think they missed a trick with Inzaghi there, a manager who has a vision, who has a potential to take his project to a club and to a team and to make him great. And you've seen that at Inter Milan. But yeah, I think with Vlahovic, it's a good deal. There's rumors coming on saying that that's the entire budget gone. So if we're knowing Juventus, it'll probably just be a summer of spending on free transfers, really. But yeah, they got a few people off the books like Aaron Ramsey. I think that was a really good deal for them. And obviously Kulusevski and Bentancur have now gone to Juventus. So they have free up some of the wages. Of course, you said there are big agent fees that have come with Vlahovic. It's a big deal. And they'll be hoping for him to hit the ground running if they are to get into the top 4 in the summer.
Yeah, I mean that's I forgot to mention, and you did that. They have Allegri as their coach, and obviously he's an extremely accomplished coach, and he was up until a couple of years ago he was the coach that like every single team in Europe wanted. But if what you're trying to do is to have like if you're trying to attract younger players, which they have been able to do for the most part, like Keane, like Locatelli, like Vlahovic, I think you need to couple that with like a young coach with an identity. Like Inzaghi was a good pick for them, as Rafael said. So I mean, Allegri seems to be a bit of an outdated coach. He's definitely very good. He's definitely very suited to like knockout football. But at this point, I don't think they have the quality to be that team that that competes for the Champions League. The reason why they were so successful with Allegri before was like they had too much quality for anyone in the Serie A to catch them. So essentially what they wanted was a knockout specialist. I think that's the main reason why they moved from Conte to Allegri. And obviously, I mean, they reached, I think it was 2 finals with Allegri in the Champions League. They were an incredible, one of the best teams in the Champions League for a few years. But now, a lot of, as I said, a lot of the old guard has left. And to me, I think I have to think that I think they gave up on Pirlo a bit quickly. Obviously, Juventus are like a club that have like incredibly high standards. So like a 4th place finish and getting knocked out by Porto in the Champions League was not acceptable for any coach in there, whether it's Andrea Pirlo, a club legend, or someone random. But yeah, I mean, I think Pirlo was an interesting coach for them because he had some good ideas, like trying to build a philosophy. Because I think Juve for a long time, other than like being winning like mentality monsters, like they didn't really have an identity on the pitch. And I think in order to be an elite club nowadays, unless you're Real Madrid and you could get Mbappe on a free, you have to have an identity, right? Most big clubs are built like that: Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, even Atletico Madrid, teams like that. So Aiden, what do you, I want to ask you, like especially on the coaching situation, like do you agree with me and Rafa? And like, do you potentially have any other ideas for like a coach that could take over there and like you meet their high standards but also build for the future? I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because I really liked I really liked the idea of Pirlo, and I also really liked Sarri and what he was doing as well at the club, because I feel like those 2 coaches are Pirlo is a young guy who brings this. He brings inexperience, and inexperience can sometimes be good for a team that needs to refresh the squad, because maybe you don't set your standard as high for X amount of seasons or X amount of windows and say, okay, hey, I'm going to let you build an identity with a couple of, a group of younger players. We'll try to bring even more younger players in, players that this coach can sort of mold into something. And they didn't give him that time. And then Sarri was a coach who I think, despite some obvious failings and things that he did not do right, he at least has such a rigid and specific and visible system that if you were to listen to the transfer targets that he wants to get in, you can see them operating well as a team as long as they sort of fill these specific roles. It almost makes your transfer approach a little bit easier in that way. And now they have Allegri, and like you said, he does feel like a lot more like a knockout coach. It feels like they're in a situation where they've lost a bet on the last two managers, and they're now sort of scrambling. And so Allegri feels like a safe option because he's been there before. He's led the team to success in the past. He knows the people who manage the club and the people who own the club and the people who, direct the club. And so I think in terms of moving on from this manager, I don't know. I feel like they're in this place where they're probably a little bit scared to move on from Allegri because they've been bitten, twice in recent memory. And so they're at a really difficult spot, I think. They have these weird sort of profiles in the team as well. Before Kulusevski left, he's a good example of a player who you don't know exactly what his role is. The same can be said of Rabiot. The same can be said of McKennie. The same can be said of Zakaria even. They're much more utility players than any specific one thing. They can do a couple different things, but they don't necessarily fit into a specific system. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. And personally, I just don't watch Juventus enough to really speak to what kind of coach they should bring in to maximize the quality specific of the players. But I think that as it is now, they're stuck in this really weird spot, and they're going to have to rely on, that kind of like passion or whatever Allegri can bring that's more of an X factor to really get them across the line and achieve the goals they want to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. And I think I want to mention that there are a lot of actually, I feel like the main criteria to be the Juventus manager is being Italian. I don't think they've had, as long as I've been watching football, they haven't had a foreign coach. And actually, Italian coaches are having a bit of a renaissance right now. I mean, obviously Conte is still at the top level, but aside from him, you have De Zerbi, who is a bit of a hipster's favorite. Now used to coach Sassuolo, now coaching Shakhtar Donetsk, playing well in Europe. You have Inzaghi, obviously they missed out on him. He took over at Inter, and then Stefano Pioli at Milan. There are many very good coaches Italian. So I think Juve should get with the times. And obviously, I mean, you're right. I hadn't considered that. Before Pirlo, I had forgotten they had Sarri. So again, as you said, two failed bets in a row. So they went to the old and familiar. Allegri, but at the end, again, with the same logic, I wouldn't be surprised at all if if their next coach was Conte again, trying to keep the same cycle going when he leaves Tottenham. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is there? I think we've covered most of the major transfer business in this window. I'm leaving this open. Do you have any other teams or players that you want to talk about, or we could do best transfer, worst transfer, and stuff like that? Great. Okay, so
I think sorry, Nick. I've got a transfer that has kind of gone under the radar.
Okay, yeah.
I don't watch much of Portuguese football. I'll be honest, but I think a player that I've heard a lot from, especially on Twitter, is Marcus Edwards. He's moved from Victoria to Sporting, and I think that's a deal that I think really has gone under the radar. He didn't really make it at Spurs around that Pochettino time. He moved to Portugal to apply his trade at Victoria, and he's caught the eye of Sporting now, and they've signed him. And with players like Pedro Gonçalves and Pablo Sarabia in that kind of attacking midfield spot, I think Ruben Almiron has got a real gem in him.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very talented player. I mean, our first time watching was at the Emirates in the 2019-20 Europa League group stage, and I think he actually scored at the Emirates for Vitória Guimarães. He was very talented. So yeah, that's a good spot. Aiden, do you have a pick for like best transfer or worst, like best value?
I think obviously Liverpool didn't actually get in, but Fabio Carvalho at the end of the window, it looks
Oh,
like
that
they'll
would have
still
been,
get it
yeah.
over the line, like in the summertime. But I just think like I'm just really impressed with the way Liverpool are building for the future. Even though I think Michael Edwards this is his last season, so he won't be continuing. But he's still there at the moment, and so he's just like he's a really smart guy, and he seems to have a really keen eye for exactly how to replace the team, taking into account not just what the ownership want and what their sort of like price ranges and what their sort of budgetary restrictions are, but also really smart about how he takes into account the coach and the quality and the type of profile and player that they're getting in. I mean, I actually attributed it to Klopp earlier in the season. I think I like was just like looking through their latest transfer since they've been really back at the top, but really since he's come in, and there's been very little misses. I don't know how much Klopp himself has to do with it. We know Michael Edwards clearly has a lot to do with it. And so that's why I'm giving him most of the credit. But I mean, they don't seem to make bad transfers. Even Naby Keita, who's been really injured for a long time, is a really, really good player whenever he's not injured.
Yeah.
You know, his issue is not his quality. His issue is the injuries. And they're building. I mean, Nat Phillips going to Bournemouth and Nico Williams, I think, also went to Bournemouth as well, or maybe he went to Fulham. They're getting experience time for two players who, in my opinion, will be Premier League ready either next season or they already are now. I think Nat Phillips is like ridiculously talented center back that not a lot of people talk about. And they're just in a position where if they want to, within 2 seasons, they could move on from their entire main core of, you know, basically they could replace their entire spine aside from, I think, Allison and maybe Fabinho right now, but a majority of their first 11 are replaceable by players who are already at the club and who have really, really good potential, or who we are genuine consensus is that they're ready to go right now, like Luis Diaz. So, Liverpool big winners in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to throw in a player that really has gone under the radar. But so my local club Brighton signed a very talented forward from Germany called Dennis Zundaf, who I wasn't aware of him, but he has an incredible story because he had only played in like the 3rd division of German football, and then in 2020 he got a move to 2nd division Belgium side Union, and he scored 17 goals and had 5 assists, and they won the 2nd division, and in their first. I think it's their first appearance at the top league, but they're a very small club, and they've just been promoted, and they're on course to win the league in Belgium. I mean, that's incredible. Like, when do you ever see that? He in 25 games he had 18 goals and 9 assists, and he led that club that was last year in the 2nd division to 1st place. Pretty incredible story, and Brighton definitely needed a striker, and he might be the answer to their goal scoring problems because he seems like extremely clinical. His goals per game ratio is pretty incredible in his career. I mean, granted, it's pretty low level compared to the Premier League, but pretty incredible story there, and a very smart transfer, in my opinion, from one of the better run clubs in the Premier League. So before we wrap up, anything else you want to mention? Okay,
no, I'm good.
That's cool. So, boys, you can shout out your Twitter or anything else you want to shout out, your writing, whatever.
Once again, thank you for having me, Nick, man, on the pod. Twitter, Rafael Adeluba, 0 at the end. And just thank you for having me. It's been a good episode. I've really enjoyed it.
It was a good time. It was a fun conversation, guys. Appreciate it. Only thing I have to plug my Twitter is at iTestFB. And hope to do more in the future. Shout out to Futbol Idealists.
That's awesome. You're definitely going to be back on the pod. Yeah, we're going to have other conversations down the road. So I mean, thanks for listening. If you made it all the way to the end, it's a long one, but it's entertaining for me at least, and for the other guys. Again, hopefully we're going to have this as a weekly series. We're going to talk about many different topics. We're going to try and bring in a variety of guests every time to have a bit of variance in the panel. And yeah, I mean, you can go follow Futbol Idealists on Twitter. We've just surpassed 2,500 followers, which is a big milestone for us. So let's get to 3K now. And you can go and check the website as well, because there's a lot of cool content and some very interesting tactical articles and whatnot. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening. I'm your host, Nick, and yeah, see you next week.